The voicemail came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I almost didn't listen to it. My name is Joel Hartman. I'm 41 years old. I design furniture for a living, custom pieces, mostly for restaurants and boutique hotels in the Pacific Northwest. I work out of a converted garage in southeast Portland, Oregon, where the rain comes down 6 months out of the year and nobody minds. The garage smells like sawdust and linseed oil, and the particular kind of quiet that comes from working alone. I've been doing this for 11 years. I'm good at it. The voicemail was from Serena. I stood in the kitchen with my phone pressed against my ear and the overhead light too bright. The way it always is at midnight when you can't sleep and you're just standing there waiting for something you couldn't name. Her voice came through the speaker carefully, the same way she used to choose words when she had something difficult to say, measured, each syllable placed like a foot on uncertain ground. Joel. Hi, I know it's late. I'm engaged. I wanted you to hear it from me before. Anyway, I'm engaged. His name is Brendan. The wedding's in June. I hope you're well. That was it. 39 seconds. I played it again. Then I set the phone on the counter next to the thing I've had on that counter for 3 years, a small wooden box, about the size of a deck of cards, made from a piece of black walnut I'd salvaged from a job site in Astoria. I'd built it on a Sunday afternoon during the first winter after Serena left, not for any particular purpose, just because my hands needed something to do and the silence was too wide. It was perfectly jointed, smooth lid, no hardware, sits on the counter between the coffee maker and the toaster, empty inside. Serena had watched me build it. We'd been separated by then, but she'd come over to get the last of her things and she stayed to watch me work. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she picked it up, turned it over and said, "You built this for nothing?" I said, "I built it because I had the wood." She set it down and left. I kept the box. I'm not sad. That's what I told friend Frelf when he asked how I was doing in the months after the divorce. Calvin runs a small brewery 2 blocks from my garage, and he has the particular quality of being unable to pretend. He can't hear I'm fine without raising one eyebrow exactly 4 millimeters, which is enough to make you want to tell him the truth. "You haven't gone on a date in 2 years, he said once. "You wake up at 5 in the morning and you sand things." I told him I liked sanding things. "You know what you remind me of," he said. "That box on your counter, perfectly made, nothing inside." I told him that was a terrible thing to say. "It's not terrible," he said, "it's just true." Serena and I had met at an art installation downtown, one of those warehouse events where someone welds scrap metal into shapes and calls it a statement. She was there with a friend, wearing paint-stained jeans and a green jacket that was 2 sizes too big. And she walked up to a piece that was basically a car door bolted to a steel plate and said, "I actually hate this." "Do you hate this?" I said I was on the fence. She said that was the most diplomatic thing she'd ever heard someone say about a car door. We got married 2 years later. She was a graphic designer with her own small studio in the Pearl District, clients ranging from tech startups to a local line of organic hot sauce. She was funny and sharp, and she knew how to make a room feel like somewhere worth being. That was her gift. She'd walk into a space, a restaurant, someone's apartment, a gallery, and within 20 minutes the furniture would be slightly rearranged and everyone would be talking to each other, and nobody could explain quite how it happened. Our marriage didn't end with a fight. It didn't end with anything sharp or sudden. It ended the way a fire goes out when the wood is just gone. Not dramatically, not with smoke, just less heat and then no heat and then cold. We had wanted different things without knowing how to say so. I wanted to build. She wanted to move. She wanted to travel more, take on international clients, spend summers somewhere that wasn't Portland, have a social life that extended beyond Calvin and his brewery and my furniture colleagues. I wanted to be in the garage. I wanted to work on things that took months. I wanted to come home and not perform. We tried to bridge it. We went to couples counseling for 8 months with a woman named Dr. Farrar who had the patience of someone who had heard everything and was still willing to listen. It helped, a little, the way cleaning out a closet helps. You feel better, but the house is still the same size. Eventually, Serena said what both of us already knew, that she didn't want to spend the next 20 years quietly wishing she was somewhere else. I didn't argue. I didn't have the heart to fight for something I could feel her already leaving. She moved to a condo in the Pearl District, 5 minutes from her studio. I stayed in the house. I kept the garage. I kept the walnut box. That was 3 years ago. After the voicemail, I called Calvin. It was almost midnight, but he picks up. That's just who he is. I told him about Serena's message. There was a pause on his end. "Brendan," he said finally. What kind of name is Brendan for a guy who steals your ex-wife? I said she wasn't stolen. She left, same difference, he said. You okay? I said I was fine. There was the 4mm eyebrow pause even over the phone. Right, he said. I'll be over Thursday. Thursday came and went. I sanded a dining table top for a hotel in Bend. I listened to the rain. I stood at the counter and drank coffee and looked at the walnut box and did not let myself think too hard about why I'd built it or what it was supposed to hold. 6 weeks after the voicemail, Serena knocked on my door. It was a Saturday afternoon, mid-October, the kind of Portland afternoon where the light comes in flat and gold through the clouds for about 40 minutes before disappearing. She was standing on the porch in a wool coat I'd never seen, her dark hair shorter than I remembered, and she looked not happy, not sad, just careful, like someone who'd rehearsed and was trying not to use the rehearsed version. I'm in the neighborhood, she said. Can I come in? I stood aside. She walked through the entryway into the kitchen the way people do when they used to live somewhere, not looking around, just moving feet, knowing the floor plan before the eyes do. She saw the box on the counter and stopped, looked at it, then looked at me. You still have it, she said. It's a good box, I said. She sat at the kitchen table. I made coffee. We talked for 2 hours about things that weren't the thing, her studio's new lease, a restaurant I was doing custom banquets for in NW Portland, a documentary we'd both apparently watched on the same weekend without knowing it. She laughed 3 times. Real laughs, not performance laughs. I'd forgotten the difference until I heard them again. Before she left, she stood in the doorway and said, I'm glad you're okay, Joel. I said I was glad she was okay too. She nodded, looked at the box one more time. Then she left. 2 weeks later, she texted asking if I remembered the name of the furniture oil I used on the dining table we'd had in the old house. I told her. She said, thanks. Then, 3 days after that, are you working on anything interesting right now? I sent her a photo of a half-built credenza in reclaimed fur. She sent back 4 words. This is so beautiful. The visits started after that. Not daily, every week or so on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. She always had a reason. She was passing through. She needed to pick up a book she'd left behind 3 years ago, which she hadn't mentioned in 3 years. She wanted to see the new piece I was working on. The reasons were the kind that are true and also not the whole truth, and I knew it, but I let it go because the afternoons were good in a way that was hard to explain. Not heavy, not nostalgic, exactly. Just easy in the way things used to be, before we started working so hard at them. Calvin noticed before I did. Your ex-fiancée, ex-wife, I said. Your ex-wife, he said, is engaged to another man and spending every Saturday afternoon in your kitchen. You know what that is? I said it was just 2 people who used to be married staying in each other's lives. He stared at me with the eyebrow thing for a full 4 seconds. 4. A personal record. Then he said, Joel, she left 3 years ago because she wanted more. Now she's back in your kitchen every weekend because she wants less. Figure out what that means. I didn't answer him, but I thought about it. What I noticed over those weeks was that Serena never talked about Brendan the way someone talks about a life they're building. She talked about the wedding the way someone reads a receipt, flat, itemized, disconnected from feeling. The venue was a converted barn in wine country outside Salem, which was Brendan's idea. The guest list was 400 people, most of whom she'd never met, because Brendan had a large extended family and a larger professional network and believed in maximizing both. The florist was someone Brendan's mother had used for her own events. The dress had been chosen during an appointment Serena attended alone because Brendan had a conference call. She said the word conference call, the way you'd say root canal. Not dramatically, just flatly, the way you name a thing you've accepted. One afternoon she was sitting at my kitchen table and her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, let it ring twice, then picked up and said hi in a voice that was a half step brighter than the voice she'd been using with me. A performed brightness, like turning up a dimmer switch to the level guests expect. She spoke for 3 minutes, said yes of course 4 times and hung up. Brendan, she said like it explained everything. I didn't ask anything, but the kitchen felt different after that. The air thicker, something unsaid moving through it. The thing I started to understand, in pieces and slowly, was that Brendan wasn't cruel. He wasn't a bad person in any obvious way. He was a regional sales director for a medical device company based in Lake Oswego, made good money, owned a house in the West Hills with a view of Mount Hood on clear days. He was attentive and organized and had opinions about wine. And he'd proposed at a restaurant in the Pearl District that Serena had designed signage for, which was either romantic or something else, depending on how you looked at it. What he was, I started to realize, was certain. Absolutely, completely certain, about everything all the time. The restaurant for every dinner, the route for every trip, the vacation for every year, already planned, already booked. The calendar filled 18 months ahead with events Serena had agreed to without fully processing that agreeing meant her own calendar was now also full, without any of her own choosing. She mentioned once that she'd been sketching some ideas for a personal project, a series of illustrated prints, something just for herself, no client, no deadline. She'd mentioned it to Brendan, and he'd asked how much time it would take and whether it would conflict with the Hendersons' dinner party in November. She stopped sketching. I didn't say anything when she told me this, but I went into the garage after she left and stood at the workbench and thought about what it means to stop making things for yourself because someone asked how much time it would take. The Saturday it broke open, Brendan came to my house. I hadn't planned for it, nobody had. Serena and I were in the garage. She was sitting on a stool watching me plane a board of white oak, the long curls of wood coming off in ribbons, that sound like tearing paper gently. She'd always liked that sound. She said it was the most satisfying sound she knew, slow work becoming something. We weren't talking much. The radio was on low, something without lyrics, and the afternoon light was coming through the high garage windows and landing on the floor in rectangles, and everything was very still and very good. Then the garage door opened. Brendan stood in the frame. He was taller than I expected, 6'2", maybe more, in a fleece vest and khakis holding a coffee cup from a drive-through chain. He took in the scene the way someone evaluates a house before making an offer, methodical, nothing missed, nothing reacted to yet. He stepped in and extended his hand to me. Firm grip, held a beat past comfortable. "You're Joel, Serena's told me about you." "Good things, I hope," I said, because it was the thing to say. He smiled, of course, but the smile didn't reach anything. He pulled up a shop stool, not waiting to be offered, just taking it, and sat between Serena and the workbench and started talking. He talked about a custom piece he was considering for their home office, as if he'd come to commission something. He described the dimensions, the finish, the timeline he had in mind. He spoke about it the way he probably spoke about everything, as a project with specifications and deadlines and a person hired to fulfill them. Serena sat on her stool with her hands flat on her thighs, perfectly still, the way a person is still when they are working very hard at not reacting. At some point Brendan paused, looked around the garage and said, "So this is where you spend most of your time," an observation delivered like a verdict. Then he looked at Serena and said in the same easy tone, "Babe, we should get going. The Pattersons are expecting us at 6. Serena looked at him, then at the floor. Then she nodded once and stood up. At the garage door she turned back briefly. Her eyes found mine for just a second. Not asking anything, not saying anything, just a look. Then she turned and walked out and Brendan followed her, and I heard 2 car doors close and a car drive away. I stood in the garage holding the hand plane, and the room was quiet, and I was not okay, and I knew it, and I let myself know it for the first time. I called Calvin. He came over that night with a 6-pack from the brewery and sat at my kitchen table and listened to the whole thing. When I was done, he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You know what that guy is? He's a load-bearing wall that thinks he's architecture." I stared at him. "He's holding everything up," Calvin said, "but nothing beautiful is happening inside." I told him that was the most useful thing he'd ever said. He looked at the walnut box on the counter. "You've had that thing for 3 years," he said. "What's it for?" I said I still didn't know. He nodded like that was the right answer. Serena didn't come the following Saturday, or the one after. I filled the weekends with work, 2 new commissions, a repair on a farmhouse table in northeast Portland, a set of bar stools for a coffee shop in Selwood. I sanded things that didn't need sanding. I let the garage be loud. Calvin had a friend, a woman named Dawn, who worked in employment law downtown and apparently took no nonsense from anyone. He didn't bring her up directly. He just left her business card on my workbench one afternoon while I was in the house and said nothing about it when I came back. I put the card in my jacket pocket. I didn't text Serena. I didn't drive past her studio. What I did, because it was the only thing I could think of that wouldn't make the situation worse, was show up at a place she'd mentioned, a community pottery class on Wednesday evenings at a studio in the Alberta Arts District. She'd signed up 3 months ago and mentioned it once, casually, as something she was trying to do just for herself. No clients, no deliverables, just clay. I parked cross Street and waited until I saw the lights on inside, and then I walked to the door and knocked. She answered it herself, hands white with dried slip, a clay smear on her left cheekbone. She stared at me. She did not look surprised. Exactly. She looked like someone who had been half expecting a thing and half certain it wouldn't come. I said, I'm not here to make this harder. I'm here because you said something once that I didn't let you finish. She waited. You said, do you ever think if we had just... And then you stopped, and I let you stop. I shouldn't have. She stepped back from the door. I came inside. The room smelled like wet earth and the low radiator heat of old buildings. There were other students at wheels across the room, not paying attention to us. We stood near the door in the corner and I kept my voice low. I'm not going to ask you to choose anything, I said. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I need you to hear this. The version of yourself that sketches things for no client and no deadline. The version that comes to a pottery class on a Wednesday night and doesn't tell anyone about it. That's not the version you have to lose. That version is allowed to exist. And I think you know that. She looked at me for a long time. Long enough that one of the other students across the room glanced over and looked away. Then she said, Why did you keep the box, Joel? I said, I don't know. Because I built it and it felt like something I wasn't ready to let go of. She nodded very slowly. Her hands were still chalky with clay. She said, I have a number. An attorney. Someone a friend recommended. I've had it in my wallet for 6 weeks. I've taken it out 4 times and put it back. I reached into my jacket and pulled out Calvin's card, Dawn's name, direct line. I set it on the work table beside her. She looked at it, picked it up, held it the way people hold things they've been looking for. Serena, I said. The first step isn't toward me. Just away from the thing that asked you to stop drawing. She didn't cry then. She just stood there with the card in her clay-dusted hand, and the room hummed with the sound of wheels and water, and I left. She called the attorney 4 days later. I know this because she texted me that night. I made the call. Nothing else. I wrote back. Good. Nothing else. What followed was not simple or clean. Brendan contested things. He hired a firm downtown and made it complicated in the way that people who are accustomed to controlling outcomes make things complicated when control is taken from them. He called Serena 12 times in 1 week. He sent a letter to her studio's landlord, implying she might be a credit risk. He told mutual friends that she'd had an emotional breakdown and was making decisions she would regret. I know about most of this secondhand, from Serena's brief updates. I stayed out of it, not because I didn't want to help, but because this fight needed to be hers, fully, legally, emotionally. If she walked away from Brendan and into my kitchen, it had to be because she'd chosen it, not because I'd pulled her there. So I built things. I delivered the hotel credenzas. I started a new commission, a set of bookshelves in quarter sawn oak for a librarian in Lake Oswego who had very specific feelings about the spacing between shelves. I let the work do what work does, which is keep your hands occupied while your mind handles what it needs to handle. Calvin updated me on Thursdays, which was when he came by with whatever experimental small batch he was testing. He'd been paying attention to Serena's situation with the focused concern of someone who understands that some things need to be witnessed, even when you can't intervene. She fired back. He told me one Thursday about 3 weeks in. Counterfiled. Dawn knows what she's doing. I said that was good. She's also back at the pottery class, he said, every Wednesday. I said that was better. The separation was finalized in February. I know because Serena texted me the morning of the court date, one line, today's the day. And that evening another, it's done. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that one. Then I stood up and I built something small, a little bowl from a scrap of cherry wood I had lying around, maybe 4 inches across, thin walls, smooth, no purpose. Just a thing made from good material that deserved to exist. I didn't go to Serena. I sent a grocery run to her apartment, nothing ceremonial, just practical things she might need. Coffee, bread, eggs, olive oil, a bag of good oranges, and a text that said front step. I didn't wait to see if she answered. She was in a new apartment in the Alberta neighborhood, 1 bedroom, high ceilings, a kitchen with original tile from the 1940s in a green she'd described to me as the exact color of a garden before rain. She was taking the pottery class. She'd started sketching again, the illustration series, the personal project, no client, no deadline. She'd booked a solo trip to Oaxaca in March that she'd been thinking about for 3 years. She sent me a photo of her kitchen table from Oaxaca. A single mug of strong coffee, a sketchbook open, morning light coming through a window with iron bars. The caption was just, I did the thing. I took a photo of my kitchen counter, the walnut box, my own coffee mug, morning light, Portland rain on the window. I sent it back. She wrote, yours is better. I wrote, yours will be. We moved slowly, more slowly than I wanted to, honestly. But I understood by then that wanting something faster doesn't make the right speed. Serena needed to know what her own life felt like before she added mine to it. She needed enough Wednesdays in that pottery studio, and enough mornings alone in her kitchen, and enough pages in her sketchbook before the weight of someone else's presence could feel like company instead of gravity. I kept building things. She kept making things. We talked on the phone, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 10 minutes. We had dinner occasionally, just dinner, in restaurants she chose and at a time that was her idea. Calvin watched all of this with the patience of a man who has spent years watching fermentation and understands that you cannot rush the process without ruining what's inside. "You know what you are?" he said one afternoon in March, leaning against the garage doorway with a test pour in a plastic cup. "You're actually good at this." I said, "At what?" "Waiting without disappearing," he said. "Most people can't do that. They either push or they leave. You just keep showing up with groceries and not knocking." I told him it was the only thing I knew how to do. He said that was enough. In April, Serena came back to the garage, not passing through, not with a reason. She just texted, "Can I come watch you work?" And I said yes, and she came, and she sat on the stool and I ran the hand plane over a long board of white oak, and the curls came off in that sound she'd always liked, and we didn't say anything that needed to be said out loud. At some point she walked over to the workbench and picked up the small cherry bowl I'd built the night the separation was finalized. She turned it over in her hands, set it back down. Her fingers traced the rim. "You made this that night?" she said. I said yes. She nodded, set it back carefully. She started coming on Saturdays again. Not every week. Some weeks she had other things, and she went to them, and that was right. But when she came, the afternoons had a different quality than before. Nothing performed. No rehearsed words, no careful management of what to say. She'd bring coffee. I'd have the radio on. Sometimes she sketched while I worked. Sometimes we talked for 3 hours, sometimes barely at all. One Saturday she brought a piece she'd made in pottery class. Small bowl, slightly lopsided, glazed in a slate blue with a rim that had gone a little dark in the kiln. She set it on the counter next to the walnut box. "It's not very good," she said. I said I thought it was good. "It's lopsided," she said. I said the best things usually are. She looked at me. Something in her face shifted, not dramatically, just the small movement of someone who has carried something heavy for a long time and feels it lift by a degree. In June, Calvin came by the house and stood in the kitchen drinking a beer and staring at the counter, the walnut box, the pottery bowl, 2 coffee mugs. He was quiet for a moment. "You know," he said, "I asked you once what the box was for." I said I remembered. "I think I know now," he said. "It was for waiting. You built something for Steen, and then you just waited." I looked at the box, the bowl beside it, the mugs. "I think," I said, "I built it because I had the wood, and I kept it because I wasn't done yet." Calvin nodded. He didn't say anything else about it. Serena and I have not made any announcements. We haven't talked about what to call this or where it's going. We had a conversation once, standing at the kitchen counter eating takeout, where she said, "I left you because I thought I needed to want more, and then I went out and wanted more, and none of it felt like anything." She set down her fork. "This kitchen is the only place in the last 4 years where I've felt like myself." I said, "You don't have to make it into something, just stay." She stayed. The cherry bowl sits on the counter, next to the walnut box now. Her sketchbooks pile up on the end of the kitchen table. Some Wednesday nights she comes home from the pottery studio, with clay on her hands, and we eat dinner late, and she tells me about whatever she made, whether it worked or whether it collapsed on the wheel. And either way her voice has the warmth of someone talking about something they chose for themselves. I still wake up at 5. I still walk into the kitchen and make coffee, but the mornings are different now. There's a second mug on the shelf. Sometimes she's already up, sitting at the table with her sketchbook and the light barely gray outside the window. Sometimes I pour both mugs and bring one to her, and we sit in the kitchen in the early morning quiet, and there is nothing performed about any of it. The walnut box is still empty. I know now that it was never supposed to hold anything. It was just a thing I built when I needed to make something. When the wood was good and my hands needed to work, and I didn't know yet what I was waiting for. Some things you don't build to fill. You build them to remind yourself you're still capable of it. I have one question for you. Not about me and Serena, about you. Is there something you've held on to? Not because you forgot to let it go, but because some part of you understood that letting go would mean something you weren't ready to name. If this story landed somewhere real for you, hit the like button and subscribe to His Silent Stories. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's your walnut box? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.